What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be talking about Stoicism. What is it? How can we incorporate it into our lives? Should we? I made a PowerPoint on it, and we're just going to discuss, what about it. Have a discussion in the comments and let me know what you guys think. So, what is Stoicism? So, it's an ancient Greek and Roman philosophy that was founded by Zeno and maybe a couple other people. Popularized it or contributed to the founding of it, or at least the idea we have it of today. The idea we have of it today. It was founded around 300 BC. It's about controlling your actions and reactions, accepting you cannot change external events, trying to discern what you can change, what you can't change, and decision making in general. It's about managing and maintaining your emotions, not being too emotional, not overreacting, not getting angry, not lashing out. And when it comes to stoicism, there's about four key aspects. There's wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, and we'll get into all these as we go on. So the dichotomy of control. What can we control? What can we not control? There's a lot of things in the world that we can't control. And then also the things that happen to you, you can always control it. For example, if you get struck by lightning, that's kind of out of your control. That's just very, very unlucky. And so you kind of accept that. But that's a very extreme example. But something we can't control is the weather. If you have an event planned, you have to reschedule it if it's outside and there's going to be a thunderstorm, and that can upset people. And we can't control other people, as much as we try. So when somebody does something we don't like, it can make us upset. But when we go and try to control them and make them act the way we want, the way we think they need to act, sometimes it's not possible. But there's also, can we put ourselves in situations where the control is more in our favor? For example, like you can't win the lottery unless you buy a lottery ticket. If you never buy a ticket, then you'll never win. But is it lucky if you bought the lottery, or is it because you bought a lottery ticket? It goes a lot with luck and being lucky and unlucky, but there's a lot of unlucky things that happen to us that we can control. And there's a lot of unlucky things that happen to us that we can't. For example, if you go to jail because you have drugs, well, it is your fault for having drugs. If you got pulled over, but maybe you're being forced to carry them, or maybe you're trying to do somebody a favor. So there's a lot that goes into it, and not every situation is black and white. Also, it's how do we control our own thoughts, and how do they control us? Many people think you don't control your thoughts. Your thoughts are just your subconscious dictating how you react and how what you think about the world, I guess. Your kind of mind, your brain, what they see, the output versus the input. But some people think you can control your thoughts, and your thoughts shape who you are. Because we have a very different life on the inside of our brain than we present on the outside. There's intrusive thoughts, there's negative thoughts, there's a lot of thoughts that we we have instinctually. And when we see somebody that we don't like, we might make a micro expression. We might do something that indicates we don't like them. But then we think, well, we got to act like we like this person because we get something out of it. Maybe you have a boss. Maybe you don't like your boss, but you act like you do, just so you can kind of move up in your career. So yeah, there's a lot of back and forth with, do our thoughts control us or do we control our thoughts? Or maybe it's a little bit of a mix. How do we control our actions to external events? If you do something such as maybe put yourself in a dangerous position, put yourself in a position where you're likely to fail, then it can almost be seen as an internal event. It was the failure of your decision making process. But external events, for example, you're driving and a car crashes and hits you. That's not necessarily your fault. Obviously you're driving and you're driving safe and you're driving correct, and a car comes and T-bones you. Is that necessarily your fault? A lot of people would say no. And I agree. But how should we react? We can't just act like the world's over because first of all, we did everything right, and things still went wrong, and that's just how life is. But when something's external, how do we get to the point where we don't get upset. We just move forward. When something happens, your fault, you fail. That's your fault. You can learn a lesson from that. But when sometimes there's no lesson to be learned, except for maybe the lesson that external events need to be taken a different way than something that's kind of your fault that you dictated. Wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. So I talked about this before. So what do these things mean? Well, wisdom is knowing what is good and what is bad, and having discernment. I would say discernment is a very important thing, I think, in the world, and a lot of people, I think, don't have it. And I think people need to study it, get accustomed to it, and learn more about it, because discernment is very important, because discernment helps us realize what's wrong, what's good, what we're doing wrong, and just wisdom in general. Knowing, okay, I might have went too far in that conversation. I might have said something I shouldn't have said. Um, Knowing the difference between right and wrong, good and bad, what's evil. It takes a while to get wisdom. Wisdom is often seen as only being, you know, only old people having it. And so a lot of it comes from experience. And you end up kind of knowing what's good and what's bad just based off of what happens to you and the decisions you make. But wisdom is important to have, because once you have wisdom, your decision making just skyrockets. You're able to make good, concise decisions that help everybody. Justice. So justice. So that's fairness, equality, and the common good. So this comes from kind of wisdom, is how do you make a decision? You use your wisdom to make a just decision. You use your wisdom to make a decision that you know is going to be good for the common people. That's going to give more quality, and that's fair. I know people often say the world's not fair. I don't like that. I think the world's as fair as you is. If it's not fair for everybody, then it is fair. So the common good. So what can you do to make life easier for everybody? You got to have justice in your morality. So courage. Courage is facing adversity, dealing with fear, and resilience to hardship. In life, we all go through things. And you really do deal with things that are proportional to how much you can deal with. If I mean, whatever you're going through could be a piece of cake for somebody else, but what they're going through would be a piece of cake for you. But that's why it's a piece of cake, because the stuff you deal with, it's easy for you to deal with, and the stuff it's hard for you to deal with is what you consider the stuff you're going through. Everybody has a hard life, and gaining courage, doing little things that increase your courage, that help you get over your fears, facing your fears, it's very important in a stoic life, because not being afraid to take charge and do the thing that nobody else wants to do is important principle to have. Okay, and next is temperance. So temperance is discipline, moderation, patience, and restraint. Discipline is when you kind of make yourself do something you don't want to do. You get a routine down. Many people say going to the gym or exercising. I go to the gym almost every day. I exercise almost every day. I don't always feel like it, but I kind of make myself do it, and I do think, sometimes I'm just like, what if I didn't do this? What if I didn't do it? Moderation. It's okay to have a sweet treat every now and then. It's okay to have something that you enjoy. I, and it also depends on what you see as that item. It's kind of like a you time. And I don't mean you time as in like taking care of yourself. You should always take care of yourself. But you time is in like something you might not be happy. You're not supposed to do, such as like eating some ice cream, or maybe just skipping out on the gym for a day. Or maybe you're taking like a cheat day, or maybe you're spending a little bit of money on something you enjoy. You're buying an action figure or a poster or a comic, and then you're spending some hours reading it, or spending hours watching a movie. Moderation. As long as you keep it in moderation, that is fine. We all need things to help us stay sane. We and this isn't to say that you should have moderation with vices, because vices are an important thing to try to stay away from. Vices are things that have control over you, and they can be very internal. Once you kind of internalize them, your brain seeks those things. But moderation is more for fun things that everybody does. You gotta hold yourself to a higher standard. Be like, yeah, There's a lot of people out there that eat ice cream every day. But for me, I'm gonna have moderation. I'm only gonna eat it once or twice a week. And that is a more simplistic version of what it is, but that's kind of the best way to describe it in my opinion. Patience. I tried my best to have a lot of patience. I can be a little impatient sometimes, but patience is very important nowadays because with the way people's attention spans are, and when you do something like waiting at the doctor's or you're waiting in line to get some food maybe, you can be very impatient. You can look around. I've caught myself doing that plenty of times where I'm looking around, I'm looking at the people that work there, I'm just like thinking like, are they gonna have my food ready? How long is this gonna take? I've been here for like 20 minutes. And then there is a line sometimes, but this can be important with everything because the people in your life that look up to you, when they see that you have a lot of patience, it's gonna help them have patience. You want to be more of a role model. And next is restraint. So restraint is very important because when you want to do something that you shouldn't be doing, and you decide, no, I'm not going to do it. You know, the book Atomic Habits, it said every decision you make is a vote for the person you want to be. So when you restrain yourself from doing something you shouldn't be doing, like, maybe you're going out to the bar, maybe you're like, you're going to spend a lot of money, you probably drink a lot of stuff that's not healthy for your body. You might think to yourself, what if I don't do it? What if I restrain myself? And there's a healthy amount of restraint, and restraint kind of goes into moderation. Restrain yourself just enough, but give yourself reward every now and then, and there's nothing wrong with that. So why are these important? Well, they help us enjoy life and not stress out. You might think all these things are stressful, but once you really get a habit going, once you kind of understand how this whole taking care of yourself and regulating your physical body, your emotional body, your spiritual body, you really do stress out less. Because the way you perceive stress is different. Before you might have stressed out over the littlest thing, but now you don't even stress out because you're just like, I can't control it, so why would I stress out about it? And that I think is a main thing of Stoicism that I might not have included in here is stress in itself is something you want to avoid because what stresses you out, there's healthy stress and there's unhealthy stress, and unhealthy stress just comes from things we can't control, such as, you know, a car crash stopping you from being early to work or you're late to work or road work being done and you're late and your boss digs into you and you're like, what were you supposed to do? So but you can't stress out about that because there was literally nothing you could have did. You can't predict the future. This is important because it pushes us to help others. Something like courage. We're seeing a lot of horrible things happen in this country right now. Courage is what helps us stand up for people that don't have a voice. Stand up for those that are being dehumanized. Standing up for those that are kind of put into a box, that are put into a subsection of the humans. And so courage and standing up for others and helping others, it's just what it's all about. Stoicism, you want people to look up to you. You want to set an example. You want to be a role model. You want to do everything you can to get to the point where you are the person people can look up to. And this helps us, and this encourages gratitude and mindfulness. Gratitude is very important. It's they've done studies that say you can't experience gratitude and worriness, like worrying about the future. You can't experience it at the same time. So when you sit there and you just think about all the things you're grateful for, we don't often do that enough. What are you grateful for? Something bad happened to you, but think about the 100 good things that have happened to you. And this is another thing that's proportional. Sometimes you're having a bad day. Think about the 100 good days you had. This encourages gratitude because it makes you not stress out about little things, and it makes you realize, all the big, great things that have happened to you compared to the little annoying thing you're dealing with right now. It's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, and you're still here. You've gotten through so much. Think about all the things you've gotten through and give yourself a little gratitude. And mindfulness is very important because it helps you kind of keep peace and regulate your emotions and not be in a constant state of worry or panic because there's something going on and it's on your mind all the time. It helps your mind kind of stay clear, calm, and concise. And this helps us connect with nature in a little bit of way because there's a lot of things in this world that are scary. AI, the government, but nature, when you connect with nature, when you go outside, when you breathe in air, when you walk through the woods, when you feel the snow kind of falling down, hits you, it really reminds you of why we're here. We're here to experience life, enjoy life, you know, try to connect with God, nature, whatever created nature, Mother Nature. There's just so much that nature can, helps with mindfulness, breathing fresh air, being around trees. Right now with the snowstorm, there's a lot of people that aren't going outside in nature, but even then, feeling cold air, nature's not always nice, but it is nature, it is natural, and that's kind of the beauty that it has. What does a stoic life look like? It looks like a couple of different things. Let's talk about some of the things that you might see a stoic person encounter. Or you might, when you encounter a stoic person, this is how you may say, does stoicism equal a happy life? Some people say no. Some people say the point of being stoic is to serve others. But some say yes, some say yes, some say being a stoic means that you are experiencing life in a way where you can't even get upset because everything that happens to you, you don't get upset about what you can't control. So, everything that happens to you is your fault. So you either learn a lesson or you realize it's out of your control, and that makes you happy. Controlling your anger, but not bottling it up. Controlling when you would get angry at something, when something would get you in a bad mood, you control it. You even use it for something else maybe, but you don't get angry. But you also don't bottle it up. You find a good release. A good way to deal with it, and that takes time. That takes a lot of trial and error. You show responsibility for yourself and your mistakes. When you mess up, when you make a mistake, you apologize and you learn a lesson. You don't try to say, you don't make excuses. That's something that I often end up doing. I think, and this is something I need to work on. And it's just, when you catch yourself making an excuse, you realize, I'm just sorry. There's no excuse. I'm just sorry. Journaling and reflecting your actions. You often see people that practice stoicism. They reflect on their day, their actions, what they did that day, how they operated themselves, how they carried themselves, and a good way to do that is journaling. And you do see that a lot. And even people that aren't stoics, they still journal and they love it. Becoming a stoic does not happen overnight. You can say I'm a stoic, I believe in stoicism, but a true stoic, it's not something you're going to be able to do overnight. It's very complicated and rigorous process. They control their anxiety and their insecurities. Everybody has insecurities. Everybody has anxiety when it comes to certain things. But being self-aware and realizing that and working towards controlling that is a big part of what they set out to do for themselves. And it's definitely healthy. If you can get to the point where you're not doing it toxically, and then you kind of become anxiety about having anxiety, and that kind of just becomes a spiral. So being able to control your anxiety, control your insecurities is very important. Thinking logically. Sometimes we get so caught up in, you know, just a moment. We get so caught up in greed, in our vices, and what we think. We don't think logically. We don't think what would be the logical decision here. We get so caught up in emotions. Sometimes thinking logically is the best thing you can do, and you got to kind of look at things from an outside perspective. Virtue. So virtue is something that I saw a lot when I was researching Stoicism. So what is virtue? So you gotta have it's moral, social, and intellectual. You know, what is good for humanity and life? So virtue is kind of just doing what's right and knowing the difference and not doing it for some type of reward, just doing it because it's the right thing to do. Virtue is a habit, doing the right thing even if it's hard. Taking the hard road, taking the obscure path, it's not always easy. It's not always going to be the best thing you can do, but it's virtuous. And that's what Stoicism calls us to be. And it's a habit, it's not something you're going to do every now and then. It's a habit. It changes the whole way you think when you start thinking of doing things virtuously. Is wisdom needed to know what is virtuous? I would say yes. That's a very important thing. Is And every time you encounter a situation, there's a couple of options, and one of them is probably virtuous. And you figure it out. You figure out what the common good is, what you can do to help others, and then when you kind of do that over and over and over, you realize what virtuous is and what isn't, and what the middle ground is, because there's almost always a middle ground. Endurance is a important part of what it means to be virtuous, and this kind of goes to temperance. Endurance is kind of when you're just you've had a bad day, you're ready to go home. You had a bad day at work, and then your mom asked you to pick up something from the store. So now you got to leave your house again, go in the cold rain, the cold weather, spend some money. But if you can endure that, people appreciate when you do stuff like that for them, especially after they know you've had a hard day. It's an important part of being virtuous, is enduring what others can't and enduring what you thought you couldn't. And growing as a person, that's what builds that habit, is doing things you normally wouldn't do or would be upset about. See, a lot of the times we do something and we get very upset about it and we give people an attitude, but doing it and not having an attitude and just kind of being calm and realizing you can't control it, that's part of it. That's what makes it part of the process. Restraint from taking the easy road. I had to type it right there. Sorry about that. Restraint from taking the easy road. The easy road's always going to be there. Sometimes the easy road is hard, but it's the easier road. And sometimes there's two roads, and both of them are hard, but there's an easier road you can take. And sometimes when you have temperance, or when you don't have temperance, you're going to be obligated to take the easy road. But you can't do that because you got to have restraint. And so this all kinds of go into being virtual. And then this is a quote I have from Aristotle. It says, and this was about virtue. He said, at the right times, on the right occasions, towards the right persons, with the right object, and in the right fashion, in the mean course and best course, and these are characteristics of virtue. What this basically means is virtue is something you learn over time by making a decision over and over and over. And would you do it at the right times, because there's a wrong time sometimes. Sometimes the virtuous things did not help. And there's the right occasion. Sometimes the virtuous thing is, like I said again, to ignore what's going on. Towards the right persons, if you help out an evil person, it's not necessarily virtuous. But if you help an evil person become good, then that'd be the right time and the right occasion. So with the right object, that just kind of means in general, like, every part of a situation, you could do something wrong, So the occasion and the time, you pick the right time, the right place, the right occasion, the right person, the right object, and the right fashion. If you help them correctly, and then with the mean course and the best course, it's like, your average of what you can and the best of what you can. These are characteristics of virtue. So here's some criticism of Stoicism. Could be seen as repressing emotions or denying them as a whole. Some people think, you're emotionless, you're like a husk. And that's a very valid criticism in some situations. Could lead to a misunderstanding of less human interactions. When you become stoic, you definitely, maybe for a while, you could isolate yourself from other people, because it's a very different lifestyle than most people live. And that can be very hard for others to understand. That can make you lose a relationship. That can make you see the world differently. That can make you demonize people that don't think like you. I don't see that happen as much, but I definitely could see it happening with a stoic. Could lead to emotional detachment. Could be seen as a coping mechanism for hardship. Some people say, that might sound dumb to you, but some people think, oh, not caring about anything is kind of how they see it. They say, oh, you're emotionally detached. And that can happen. The more you kind of, control your emotions, the more you can control it when you actually need to be emotional. And you need to be angry maybe at injustice. You need to be angry at things that shouldn't be happening. And then a coping mechanism could be kind of just thing that you kind of fall back on. You always kind of use it, which isn't necessarily always a bad thing in this case, but it very much can be. And then another criticism is, what we do control and what we don't is not as simple as that. Some things we influence but don't control. Some things we don't influence but control. And that kind of goes to the lottery tickets. Like, you control if you You don't control if you win the lottery or not. You can only control if you buy the ticket. So sure, you get upset if you don't win, even though you bought 100 tickets. And should you be happy if you won, even though you only bought one ticket? It's not always black and white. There's a lot of different situations, and that I think is probably the most valid criticism when it comes to Stoicism. So here are some studies I found on the internet about Stoicism. I don't have any statistics necessarily. Maybe next time on my next philosophy, I'll try to include some. Let me know below if you want to see that. But Stoic practices have been seen to lower anxiety levels, which makes sense because you're practicing things like gratitude, things like controlling your emotions. Practicing acceptance has shown a rise in emotional stability. And they look at people that accept what happened to them. And if you're constantly upset and then happy all the time because things that you can't control happen to you, then that'll drastically change how emotional you are. But when you accept the things you can't control, that helps a lot. College students who journaled saw a reduction in stress levels. So this goes back to reflecting. When you kind of reflect, look at yourself and realize, what you do and how it makes you feel, what you maybe ate that day and how you felt. It really makes you realize, okay, I can do this, reduce my stress levels. I can do this to just make my life happier. Stoic inspired books are some of the highest rated and bought books in a motivational and self-improvement categories. When it comes to self-help books, when it comes to online videos, courses, anything you can do to help yourself grow as a person, you're always going to see Stoicism books, things that are influenced by Stoicism, things that are based on Stoicism. They're going to be at the highest rated categories all the time. And self-improvement and motivational, anything like that. Whether it's YouTube, whether it's books, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, or I already said that, but Twitter, anything. Large corporations show that they use Stoic decision making in their leadership strategies. Now, I'm not 100% sure what this means, but I think this kind of just means when it comes to Stoicism, you can incorporate that in anything. Whether it's your business, your lifestyle, your workout, your hobbies, anything you can include it in. So, what are the key takeaways? So, focus on what you can control, accept reality and what happens to you that are kind of external. The the way you view the world controls your emotions. If you see everything as negative, you're going to have a negative mood all the time. You're going to be upset, you're going to be angry, you're going to be mad, you're going to be pissed off. Everything's going to get on your nerves all the time if you see the world as negative. Not saying the world's not negative. It definitely is in a lot of different ways, but when you see it as hopeful, and when you see that you can make a difference, that's when things actually change. Practice emotional endurance, resilience, and not emotional suppression. Again, there's a fine line between what we can control and how we react to it, but then getting to the point where we're all still human. And when you do have very high emotions about something, you got to accept that and realize how you can work around it, not just say, oh, I don't, and just kind of forget about it and keep on moving on. You have to acknowledge what you do care about and figure out how you can incorporate that into your stoic life. Practice and learn about virtue. Virtue is very important. It goes to everything being a stoic is putting yourself in the right situation to help the right people at the right time. You could help the wrong person at the right time. You could help the right person at the wrong time. And sometimes it can still help, but sometimes it can't. And that's kind of what discernment is, and virtue and wisdom. Use reflection and be practical. Like I said before, journaling, keeping a calendar maybe, just kind of writing down how you felt and what you did that day. It's very important to helping yourself maintain and regulate the way you feel about things. Commit to the effect of something and not the outcome. Oh, you know what I think I meant to put? I meant to put the word effort here. So commit to the effort of something and not the outcome. So the effort that you put into something is more worth it than the outcome. So that can kind of mean like it's about the journey, not the destination. It's about all the hard work you put in, and always about the money you make at the end of the day. Obviously, that money is important, but right now, especially like something like YouTube or making TikToks, you might put a lot of work in, a lot of effort, and not necessarily gain anything from that. But it's about the journey, what you learned. It's not always about the outcome, and the outcome is obviously what you did it for. But you can do it for the once you get to the point where you're doing it for the effort, then you're going to be a lot happier with what you did because you're going to care about the work you're doing and not just looking at it as like a money sign. And there's actually a quote. I think it goes something like, "The man that loves walking will walk farther than the man that loves the destination." So You gotta fall in love with the process in order to keep on going. Otherwise, you'll never keep on going. And once you get to a certain point, you could stop. You could be satisfied. But yeah, I think that kind of wraps up this video. I'm sorry I was a little groggy and a little like, I had a couple coughs. I'm still a little sick. I'm coming off of a sickness because of, the cold weather. But let me know what you guys think. If you liked the video, leave a like on the video. And yeah, if you want to see more videos about philosophy, if you want to see something about something different, I think I might do a video on writing. Let me know in the comments below. And yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed the video. And if you want to see more, subscribe. And yeah, let me know in the comments below what you want to see next. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope everybody has a good day.